Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. We're in the garage today working on this John Deere 140 3-point hitch. So I've had this hitch now for about a year and a half, and I'm finally getting close, I believe, to having it functional. This was a factory option from John Deere for the 140 tractor. So I'll take you back in time to where this all started, and we'll get you caught up to where I'm at currently. Alright, we'll get the top link out of the way. So this pin I think is loose. Yep. We'll set this aside for now. Alright, well, I'd like to get the cylinder off because it has the hydraulic hoses on it. And I think I'm going to need to use some heat to heat up some of these swivels. So let's go ahead and pull that cylinder off. Looks like they have two R-clips in there. Go ahead and take those out. Guess that one was already loose. And might have to drive this first pin out. That bottom one looks like it's loose. Yep. So we'll drive this top one out now. All right. And the cylinder is free. My plan is to break this thing down piece by piece, and that will just make it easier to work on the individual parts, as well as check out all the connection points and everything, just to do a very thorough job. So we'll go ahead and start taking this thing apart as much as we can. One thing that's interesting, you'll see each of these arms has a trunnion connection here and here. So there's two separate pins, a pin in there and a pin in there. The pin heads are welded to the inside of this little square, this fabricated square, and they stick out through this bracket, which is also welded as one piece. So sort of interesting, but this can never come back out of this unless you would cut these pins out, which shouldn't be a problem. I think everything we need to do, we can work around that. I think those are actually free. Yeah, this seemed to be free. So just something interesting how they actually built that. So we'll go ahead now and we'll try taking out some of these bolts down here, and these back two pins, we'll pull these arms off. So they have an R-clip at the bottom of this pin, but the pin's pushed nearly all the way through, so I need to bend it back around and try to get it out. If not, we'll just cut it. Alright, the clip's out, the clip pin, but now the actual pin looks to be frozen up, so that might need to be driven out. Okay, all four R-clips are out. So take the back portion of the chains off. Each one of these pins has a cotter pin. This one is on the outside, this one's on the inside, and these pins are actually different. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. This one has like a mushroom type head on it, and this one just has a flat head. So we'll try to get these cotter pins out and drive these two pins out. Let's see how these large pins want to come out. I use a pry bar. There we go. That one wasn't too bad. There's a bracket that comes out for the chain, and then just the arm. So that's it. That's everything at that connection. Put that aside so I don't lose anything. Let's try the other side now. I think if I just use a hammer, pull that pin. Yep. So there's a spacer on the outside, and there's this long, I'll show you here. There's this lift strap that prevents the hitch from going up or down too far. So there's a spacer that came out of there, that strap, the bracket for the sway chain, and then just the arm. So that connection is loose now, and we'll go ahead and pull these bolts out next, and then the arms should come off of the main bracket. And it should be loose. Just a little bit of, I think, corrosion in there holding it up. There it goes. So both arms are out now. So parts book is always nice, but just in case we don't remember, this bracket or this plate right here you see, that faces downward like this. That's for that bolt we just took out. The sway chain mounts to the inside of the arm, and the arm bevels to the outside like this. It has a bevel in it like this. So that's how we know which arm goes on which side and how they actually go back on. All right, those are ready. Probably take those outside next, and we'll throw some heat at these swivels and these two pins. We'll try to drive those out first, and we'll see what happens with that. Okay, to break this down a bit further, next we're going to remove these two parts. I'm going to call it a pillow block or some sort of bearing, for lack of better words, but there's basically two bolts that hold that piece to the main frame of the hitch, and these pillow blocks support the rock shaft, I'll call it, which both of the lift arms for the 2-point arms at the bottom are. So I think if we take these bolts out on both sides, this whole top assembly will slide up out of this main frame. Well, the odd thing is these bolts to me look like self-tapping bolts. I don't know if that's correct or not. I'll need to check the parts book. Let's see if I can't break it with this little 3/8 drive. Wow, it's going to be tight. Might need to get the 1/2-inch drive out. Yeah, let's try the 1/2 inch. Ooh, that's going to be tight. All right, it's loose anyway. And the bottom has a nut on it. So that's sort of an interesting discovery. So on the right hand side, there's a self-tapping bolt. The second bolt has a nut on the inside. Just see it there. On the left side, the top one has the through bolt with a nut, and the bottom one is a self-tapping bolt. So I don't know if that's correct, but we'll go ahead and take it apart anyway, and we'll look in the parts book and see what they call for. Okay, we got all 4 bolts loose. I'll go ahead and take those out now. Minus this one self-tapping bolt. All right, with all 4 of those bolts out, this top assembly should, come right out. All right, well, the main frame is broke down about as far as I think I'll take it. I need to free up these spring-loaded pins, but that shouldn't be too bad. We'll get everything cleaned up. The next battle will be to get these trunnions freed up and to get these all thread adjusting bolts loosened, because right now those are frozen solid in the trunnions. So I think it's going to be the most difficult thing left. All right, well, I did some work off camera. I'll show you what I did. So I got the roll pin out of this side, and then if you remember, this side had a nail in it. Got that nail out. I used a die, so it's a 5/8 by 11 thread per inch die, and I chased the threads because these holes had a few burrs next to them. So I got those all cleaned up. I just put a socket with a breaker bar on that nut, and actually was able to break that loose. It wasn't that tight at all. Been spraying it down with some penetrating oil, so that's all it took. So we'll go ahead and get these nuts pulled off next. These actually come off pretty easily. We got both of these off the lift arm assembly. So these bolts should come right out now. Slide right out of this bracket. So there's a washer, and these washers have a lot of wear on them. You can actually see it bent and folded itself over. So I'll have to try to find some new washers, but those should just be standard flat washers. So now that these are broken down, I'll go ahead and use the die, get these bolts cleaned up, make sure that all the threads in decent shape. So that takes care of that. So this part, this lift arm assembly, it's as far down as we can take it now. So both of these trunnions spin free now. So that's good. Like I mentioned before, I think this bracket, you cannot remove it. It's trapped between these two plates, which are welded to the main shaft here. There's a grease fitting here, and hopefully if I check that fitting, everything will work. If not, I'll have to try to get that out of there and get a new fitting in there. So that takes care of this whole assembly. We'll get all these parts cleaned and we'll move to the next step. All right, so we have an update on the lift arms and top link. I spent some time off camera again, and it took a while, but I was able to get all 6 swivel joints loosened and freed up, which is a big step forward. It took many heat cycles and penetrating oil, and the way I found that worked the best, I clamped the arm into a vise. I put a hex head bolt about 4 inches long through the eye, and it just fit in there nice and tight. And I put about a 2-foot long cheater pipe over top of the bolt, and I was able to use that leverage to just break that swivel loose. And the second it just broke loose, I stopped, I went back, I sprayed more oil on it, and that way I didn't pull too hard while everything was still kind of dried and locked up. I didn't want to score anything up. So I used some oil, just some 10-weight oil, as well as penetrating oil, and then just worked it back and forth until it freed up, and it actually pushed a lot of rust and dirt out from in between the arm and the swivel there. So that was quite a lot of work, sort of dirty work, so I didn't want to get that all on camera, didn't really have time to. So that's the good news. We got all 6 joints loosened up now, and the top link, I got each end loose. So this is like a turnbuckle. One side is right hand thread and the other side is left hand thread. So when you turn the center, they both go out or they both come in. So one of these was frozen up pretty good. I was able to spray some oil down. There's a hole right there, you can see it, and just let that soak inside of there. So all these parts are good to go, except I have one more small pin to get out. This was for the sway chain mount, and that pin was in there pretty good, so I still have to drive that one out. All right, fast forward a few days, we got all the parts cleaned and prepped. So I cleaned all the threads on all the bolts, the adjusting rods, everything like that, all the threaded holes. I used a die to chase all the threads. I wiped down all the parts with WD-40 to help preserve them, because I want to keep this sort of patina look to it. It should match the tractor very well. I'm going for an original look to it. And I was able to break down these trunnion swivels a bit more. There's actually 2 parts right here that came out of this. So now this assembly is as far down as I can take it. Everything else is welded together. Okay, the first thing we'll do is to get both of these parts back into the trunnion. Now in theory, it's pretty straightforward. This spacer drops down into the housing like this, and you line up both of the bores all the way through, and then you slide the cylinder through. It's sort of tight, so I might need to take a few tries at it just to get this turned the right way. Okay, both trunnions are assembled again. Next, we'll get this whole assembly mounted up to the main frame of the hitch. There are those two pillow block bearings on either side that bolt to that. Okay, so these bearings again, if you recall, there's a threaded bolt on the top and a through bolt on the bottom with a nut. So that's how that goes back together. The grease fitting actually faces down like this. You can sort of see the mark of where this used to be like this. But these need to go back on the ends of the pivot shaft. Okay, we got the lift arm assembly on. It's important to note that the bottom hole is actually slotted, and that allows you to pivot this bearing and make sure you get both of them on the same axis, because if you don't, they could actually bind on the shaft and then it would be extremely hard to turn this. So you want to take some time, sort of play around with it and get both these bearings on the same axis, and that way everything should turn freely. So we're going to install the left hand draft link as you're looking at it from the back of the tractor. So this one, it's important to get the correct pin. So it's this flathead pin. That pin goes in from the outside like this. Next, on the inside, this travel limit strap, I'm going to call it, it goes in there next. There's a small spacer that goes on next, and then finally the draft link can go in, followed by the sway chain mounting bar. I'll actually pull this lift strap out of the way and we'll get that onto the pin. That should help hold that up out of the way. Let's make sure the spacer didn't fall out, and then this bracket will go on for the sway chain. If everything will line up here. There we go. And then there's a cotter pin that goes through that main pinhole. Okay, we'll do the right hand draft link next. This one's relatively simple. All this one has is a pin, the draft link, and then the sway chain bracket. So there's no spacer or anything else on this one. Now this one you actually put the pin in from the inside direction, and I'll show you why in a minute. Okay. So you can see here, that's where the cotter pin goes through the end of that pin there. Okay, we'll do this left arm first. Well, the first thing to do is to take this bolt, feed it back through this bracket, just like this. Now, the washer that came off of there, this one wasn't too bad, but the other one was sort of messed up, so I was able to find a replacement. It's approximately the same size. So we're going to go ahead and put these new washers on both assemblies. That goes on next, and then there's an R clip that goes through that hole. Sort of a handful here when you're trying to get everything lined up and reassembled to get this bracket lined up. I'll put it back through. Okay. Then there's just a bolt with two jam nuts. They're both the same thickness. And that bolt will go in through the bottom. Trying to pick everything up here. I'm putting the bolt in from the outside. I believe that's how it was, and that way the nuts will be to the inside. Just like that. So for this bolt, it's important to note The reason why they're 2 jam nuts is because you do not want to tighten the first one down against the clamp, because you will actually compress that clamp against this arm and then it won't want to pivot. So you want to leave, I'll keep roughly a 1/16 inch gap back behind the nut or so, and then I'll lock the jam nut down to that nut. That way this joint can still pivot freely. So with both arms on now, we can go ahead and assemble the tops here, and all it is, it's a nut which threads down against that spacer pipe inside the trunnion. So for now, we'll just make those snug tight. Then there's one flat washer that goes on the outside of this link here, over top of this pin, just like this. And then for now, I'll just put a cotter pin in there, just loosely, until we make sure we're done. So we can go ahead and put the chains on next. There's one of these heavy C-clamps. Feed that through the one end like this. This end goes back to the mounting link near the tractor. Then there's a pin with an R-clip, just like this. That's how you secure it back there. So back to where we are today. One of the final things I had to do was make new lift bolts. Now these ones originally, I believe, would have worked fine, but due to that hitch sitting outside for many years and the corrosion that was on it, a large portion of these threads, even though I can force a die all the way down this bolt, I still cannot thread this bolt all the way through this trunnion block right here. And because of that, I cannot pick up the 3-point hitch manually all the way. And that's an issue with that Brindley tandem harrow disc that I picked up. To raise that disc high enough, I found out that you need to have these threaded essentially as high as you can go. So I had to replicate these. I don't know if you can still buy these from John Deere, but they were easy enough to make, so I figured why not just make them myself. So they're a 5/8 bolt, 7 inches long. These are grade 5. And the only special thing about them is they have one hole drilled near the hex head and one hole drilled at the other end. So this hole is a 3/16 hole, and down here is a 1/4 inch hole. So I just replicated that on these new bolts. I had to buy these bolts through McMaster Carr. Most of your big box stores will not have this length and this size. This is a coarse thread, 5/8, 11 threads per inch. So I will go ahead now and get these new bolts in here. We'll give it a quick test and make sure these are going to work. All right, just like that, we got the original bolts replaced with new ones. I was unable to buy these in just a plain steel, so these are a silver zinc, so they sort of stand out here and really don't match the rest of the patina, but that's okay. I'll take functionality over looks here. So now you can turn these bolts and essentially pick these arms up, shorten this length here. And when your cylinder is retracted, you can have these arms relatively high as a starting point, and then you can lift the cylinder and really pick this up, which is what I need for that disc. So I have some 1/4 inch roll pins now. I'll drive those through these 1/4 inch holes I drilled, and at least that's how this hitch was when I purchased it. I've seen some pictures online, and based on the year, it looks like they may have had a little folding handle for the tops of these bolts. But for now, those roll pins will work. Let's get those on there. Okay, that takes care of these new bolts. Have the roll pins in, and now you can use that roll pin as a handle, and you can thread that in or out all the way, and that sets your initial height for your arms. So if I pick up on this, now that lifts much higher off the ground. And of course, if you lower it down, initially you'll be starting out, I think, very close to the ground. So, all right, we are down to the hydraulic cylinder. This is a new cylinder that I bought because the original one with this 3-point was in very rough shape. It was fully extended, and the rod where all the chrome is pitted pretty well. And I just thought, let's just start from scratch, buy all new fittings, new hoses, and just hopefully do this right. So the John Deere part number for the cylinder is right here at the bottom. If you want to pause that video, that's the number. This cylinder is used on a number of John Deere implements. So more than just the 3-point hitch. This was used on the front snow plow, snow blower, center mount blade. So it's a fairly standard size cylinder. Unfortunately, John Deere no longer makes these. You can search around all you want. I believe only one company makes these and then sells them through a variety of different distributors. So I picked this up on eBay. It's a welded cylinder. Just did a quick look over everything. It looks pretty decent. Guess we'll find out how the seals are in the long run. You'll need to buy 2 of these and 2 of these. Now 2 of these came in one pack from John Deere. So these are the elbows. That's the second part number here. So we'll get those threaded into the cylinder housing. The cylinder comes with little Allen set screws. So we'll take those out. I am going to back these fittings up with some PTFE paste just to hopefully prevent any leaks. They're relatively small. I don't want to use any Teflon tape on that, especially threading that into the housing. All right, I got the first 2 fittings in. Now, I will warn you about this. You have a one-time shot at getting those in there. And what I mean by that is this is a one-time installation from what I understand. I've even seen another reproduction cylinder and tried taking that one apart before, and when I took this fitting out, these threads in the cylinder weren't too good. So I did apply the PTFE paste to each one. I got them squared up, turned it by hand for a few threads, and then used a 1/2-inch wrench on that. Got that to the correct position and as tight as I thought necessary. So it's important to note you want the openings to sort of face each other like this, because when you put the next elbow fitting, it'll be like this. And essentially what you're doing is you're trying to route that around the edge of the cylinder back to the body of the cylinder on each end. So these fittings will face each other when I'm done here. Okay, I got both hoses made up with all the correct fittings. Now I believe the parts book calls for 2 18-inch long hoses to get from the cylinder to the outlets. I believe it's on the short side. So I took some measurements prior to having these hoses made. I'm going with 22 inches on the long one and 20 inches on the short one. Now, to make this work right, I purchased a 90-degree elbow fitting. This is a 1/4 inch Pioneer quick disconnect. And the reason you go with the elbow like this is because of how the outlets come out of the tractor. So it just makes for a much lower profile hydraulic hose run. One more part I was missing was the cylinder stop bracket. Now, you need to have the correct fittings like I showed for this to even fit and work. Essentially, how you install it, this passes over the rod of the cylinder, and then you use this pin and you pin these curved links to one of these corresponding holes, and that adjusts your different depth settings. Basically prevents the cylinder from fully retracting. And here's a close-up view of how that cylinder stop bracket works. I pinned it in the second or the middle hole just as a starting point. All right, hoses are on. Just took a little bit of routing work on the hoses to make sure that they pass each other okay and don't rub. One point here, might need to maybe tie that one line like that just to keep that hose off this pin, so that's probably not a big deal. There's probably different ways to plumb your hydraulics, but this is just one of the ways that I found to do it. So I will start this tractor now. I realize some of the transmission oil will go to the cylinder, so I'll need to fill this back up, but that's not a lot of fluid in there, so well, I think that about wraps this video up. Appreciate you watching, and if I find anything new with this or any issues that develop, make sure to fill you guys in, and hopefully everything goes well here next weekend. We'll be trying out the Brindley tandem disc, so we'll find out how it works then. Again, thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again.